All right, welcome to session 3 of 10 Speed Sessions. I'm Nate Turner. With me today is Kevin King, co-founders of 10 Speed. And today we just have two main things on the agenda. One is just allowing ourselves to kind of go into a lot of this topic that's very prevalent right now, which is how to kind of be shifting measurement of activities, all non-paid activities, how to be thinking about organic search, in terms of measurement. So that's a really big topic. And then there also was a post in Search Engine Journal about 10 hurdles CMOs today are facing, which a lot of that kind of resonated and ties with a lot of what we're talking about today. So
Yeah.
that's the bulk of it. And so I think just to kind of kick it off, we obviously talk to a lot of marketers. We talk to not always as many CMOs necessarily, but certainly, marketing, different types of roles, but manager, director, VPs. And so we are, are certainly having a lot of these conversations right now. A lot of people are having them on LinkedIn, elsewhere. But it is a big shift in how, people are thinking about the metrics and just kind of how to work from that. So that's kind of where we want to start.
Yeah. I think kind of like provide more context to it's particularly important, and the conversation has like really risen to the top around how you measure organic success over the past, I'd say even 3 months, but 3 to 6 months, you probably say. But it's really become even more so as the whole GEO, LLMO, whatever you want to call it, but GEO seems to be winning out now. AEO, as we talked about before, that seems to be a big part of the shift, is just really how people are finding things online now. And I think just if you want to make it super binary or black and white, that it was a lot of times from an organic perspective, just organic search, right? So now it's evolved, but that's why it's come up. But I think the thing I would probably set as the tease into this conversation is that we've already been in that world for a while. And there is what I believe a lot of catch up that we're doing in regards to how we measure organic success.
Yeah.
If you were only measuring it on search, that was a very, very narrow focus, and you were missing the forest through the trees.
Yep. Yeah. And I think if you go back to your typical source medium type of categories in Google Analytics from a long time ago, you had paid channels and specifically, paid search. You had organic search, just traffic directly coming from search engines, referral, direct, and then social started to become a bigger piece. Initially that was heavily lumped into referral, kind of got its own bucket, kind of didn't. But there's a lot that has shifted within that landscape. So in GDPR certainly was, a big, we could go way back to say you used to be able to get organic keywords in Google Analytics, but more recent than that, GDPR started to shift how, analytics and tracking was happening. And then the launch of GA4, became another big kind of milestone shifting point into how people were looking at that, just dealing with, we had, 10 Speed was running. We had clients who we went through that shift with all of them. And there was a noticeable shift in having less clear attribution when the GA4 rollout happened. A lot of things you can do, and I think companies have figured out, but I think there's some steps of degradation there. And then to your point, for months we've had even if you go back to featured snippets initially rolling out and being some 0-click search, then more recently AI overviews and that type of behavior. So it really has been sort of this stair stepping down and then away from this world where you could know exactly where people came in from, exactly what they're converting on. And then to your point, the rewiring that's necessary to how you think about organic, and is that just what comes from a search engine, or is organic, non-paid more broadly, and that type of stuff.
Right. And I think the reality is that content, or however you're marketing your product through non-paid channels, I know we'll do this a lot probably throughout this conversation, but is you're creating things that you're distributing into a lot of places that will naturally find themselves into places that maybe you didn't even intend, but you are optimizing for specific places. Search has been a big one. But even the past few years, we've seen the rise of, like, you kind of alluded to dark sources, or I'd say dark sources, but like, it's like Slack communities or things like that. Like, there's places where people are sharing and talking about products and in ways that like are the result of your marketing efforts. And it's like historically been more considered like earned media, I guess. And that's kind of like, it seems like where it's going back, at least that, or organic is maybe evolving more into that kind of space, which is a good thing that everyone is broadening their understanding of that. But like, I guess to put a point on it is just, there are so many channels that are built with organic intent. And I don't think everybody really considers all of those when actually even creating a strategy for how to market your product.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, I think like I was alluding to before, I think there's just a really, really big shift necessary. Just an entire generation of people who experience digital marketing in that like very clean, crisp attribution standpoint. And the reality is that a lot of those people are now executives, they're now board members. And so you also, like, I think that that's going to be a very, very critical shift is how is the board judging the executive team? How is the executive team judging the marketing team? And if they're still trying to hold on to this, like, I don't want to spend on that because I don't know exactly what I'm going to get from it, or, it's like more specific conversations around organic search in particular, because like of the rise of generative AI or whatever it might be, like there's so many things that it's just going to require a shift to having a better blended view and understanding of like the multiple ways that it can impact from that. And then I think the other part is that the marketing team, we've said it for forever, like, organic search is just one distribution channel.
Correct.
You've spent time and money to create a good piece of content. If you, ideally you are creating good content, but you've spent the time and money to make it, use it, distribute it multiple ways, like multiple channels, like get the most out of that content. And if you're not doing that, then you are kind of like just leaving yourself to have maybe a smaller piece of the total pie versus, we created this and we're putting it in all these places. We're getting awareness, we're getting reach, we're getting engagement, we're getting all these different things.
Right. And I think that is really what you should be looking at as a whole across a lot of things, which I know we'll touch on a few things and I don't want to get there just yet when it comes to how to like actually look at that. But I think one of the things that has been interesting, because we are kind of going back to a time in which attribution wasn't as clear, where we had this like golden age of like everyone having a really strong understanding of, hey, my conversions come from these channels. You can get some of that, but at the end of the day, like you have to have some self-awareness or acknowledgement that like it's not all actually 100% accurate. And there is actually going to be a case for like correlation across a bunch of different things, that if you're doing all of these things, especially for producing content and distributing content, and you're getting more eyeballs across a set of like maybe predetermined and aligned and agreed upon sources that are within a specific bucket, maybe organic, then that like what you're doing is working. It's, especially if those bottom funnel, lower funnel metrics are going up into the right, which we've touched on, I think, a bit in one of the previous episodes and other episodes. And we talk about a lot with clients is that like focus on the high or lower funnel conversion, business impact metrics, and then you can establish what your organic KPIs are in this new world across a bunch of these new sources.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess to be more specific, you're saying like instead of like companies look at organic search impressions in Search Console, you're saying that now requires just looking at that different, maybe bundling or blending impressions or, overall reach in a different way across more channels. And then obviously we can get into more of the generative AI metrics, and we'll talk about that shortly as well, around like how that introduces new types of KPIs that are not necessarily replacing, but being added to those other ones. Is that kind of effectively what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think labeling those kind of groupings accordingly, where like, I don't want to sit here and say like impressions are the end all be all KPI, but if you put that in an awareness bucket, then that's good. Like that's what it is, right? Especially if you're going after the right things or trying to get into the right places. Now I know we're going to talk a bit about like referral sources, but that's actually one of the other new kind of groupings is like referral sources specific to LLMs being considered organic, but like that's where we're having conversations a lot these days around making sure that we are defining that appropriately, because referral sources are from those platforms are organic. You're not paying to be in those places outside of the effort that goes into the work.
Right. Yes. So you're saying analytics is categorizing it as referral.
Correct.
From, ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever. But in reality, like the original concept of referral was there's a website that's linking to you.
Yes.
And like
it was more of
referring traffic to you. So I could understand the case to be made for it to be referral, but at the end of the day, it is like that's what we're saying. Like it kind of all starts to blend, because at the end of the day, if that's replacing a query in organic search, and it's now in the LLM, then that does have much more of an organic and earned aspect, but it is also referring traffic, and therefore like you're kind of just splitting hairs and
absolutely
need to look at it in one bucket.
And we're not like practically or tactically saying like we're forcing the labeling of referral traffic in platforms and systems. Maybe that happens to some, or like certain sources can end up becoming categorized in different ways officially, but it's more that like if you can have a reporting system set up in which you do actually strategically organize those things, your understanding of your organic impact becomes not, probably a lot broader in terms of what your understanding is today, but just even more effective because you actually understand what sources to optimize for, and and then segment and do all the things that we are used to doing.
Which is, at the end of the day, like that is one of probably the top 3 things analytics and data should be doing for you. Is telling you what's working, what's not, where to do more, where to do less. Yeah. So before we jump into a bit more around the like generative engine metrics, and then also like some other measurement model stuff, kind of put you on the spot. Do you have like 2 or 3 of the the most common things you're hearing through client conversations and whatnot around the questions, like just how companies are trying to figure this out right now? Like what are the questions they're either being asked of them or being asked of us, and like just like what are, just to kind of like commiserate or not commiserate but like just help anyone who is listening to kind of understand like what others are going through and whether it's similar or not.
I think the biggest one which we are discussing a lot and seeing a lot of even online discourse around is it worth investing in organic? That broad question. And it's interesting because it's really closely correlated to what which is a big reason was why we're talking about this, the decline in click-through rates in organic search. That's like what is driving that. And of course the rise in LLMs, but like if you look at your data, it's almost like I think that a lot of people are wondering if like their entire organic footprint is just going to all of a sudden be completely dried up. When in the reality is we're seeing like click-through rates drop from like the organic search, but it's still their organic in general. If you look at everything, is still their number one source.
Right.
And the metrics from a business perspective are still either sustaining themselves or going up. It's just this like kind of broad reactive kind of panic around just the visibility component.
Yep.
And not a deeper dive and understanding of like even where those that decline in visibility is actually happening. Because a lot of the times what we're seeing is it's like it is old legacy stuff that isn't as important to the client.
Correct.
So yeah, I'd say that's at least the number one.
Yeah. You're saying the biggest concern is around like losing that, but ultimately a layer deeper, it's heavily into click-through rate, probably lower impressions overall to some extent, but when you look all the way through the funnel, there's far less impact on the core conversions, revenue, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're seeing, other secondary or however you're labeling them, KPIs like engaged sessions, like going up from those new sources too. So like even if they're losing click-through rates or clicks on like the organic search side, but gaining more on the LLM side, the traffic they're gaining, even though it's not as much necessarily, is far more engaged than it used to be. Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting shift because all of the metrics or the benchmarks that we have are being completely like reset, or the expectations that we have for how these things should perform, things being content, being organic search, and now these new sources are just changing.
Yeah.
And there's a like collective industry like tornado of like trying to figure out exactly what to do. And the other thing about that is that everyone's trying to figure out where they should get these lost. How are they going to reclaim these lost clicks and this lost traffic and all that? And it's almost like a fool's errand. Like you're not going to be getting them back in the same way that you had before. It's not a one-to-one. Although if you layer over, which we've done a little bit with some clients, you can see that like a decline in some of their visibility when it comes to like top of funnel or this and that. You can see overlay it with a increase in LLM traffic. So it's not necessarily one-to-one there, but you can see that like it's shifting, but probably becoming more engaged, and that's a good thing. And I just think that everyone's just doesn't understand how to like validate it, I guess, because our previous expectations are up and to the right, more, year over year, month over month, quarter over quarter. And we're just in this like time of, it's not going to be that way for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I think it was the first session that we did, we talked about like that importance of focusing on those lower funnel, core conversion revenue metrics, and not panic and, like you said, sort of fool's errand and chase to try to reclaim stuff that wasn't valuable. Like if you're still converting, still driving revenue, obviously if your revenue is going way down, totally justified. That is a very different story. But I do worry and but ultimately expect that there will be companies that just kind of shoot themselves in the foot, or take a huge step back by trying to chase these things more, trying to kind of hold on to whatever was, or refuse to change the way they're measuring and looking at success, and therefore are just kind of falling behind the folks who recognize where it's headed, how to reorient, how to set the new baseline, and then go forward from there.
Yeah. The one really timely thing I saw was from some keynote I saw this morning, was like Sam Altman from OpenAI talking about how ChatGPT isn't actually they're not actually a Google or search competitor, and they're basically doing their own thing. At this point, it's really clear because of the experience people are having there. And then if you look at like a lot of the data that people are now like updating like monthly around like market share and all that, it's very clear that that's not the case. And I think when you tie it back to what marketers should be doing in businesses and how they should be thinking about things, which is how they should have been thinking about them in less of a panicky way, is just making sure that you understand where your audience is at and optimizing for that.
Yep.
Now, yes, there's new sources, but it doesn't mean that your audience is left Google or Bing, or we never always talk about Google. We don't talk about any of these other search engines, but they're still there. It's just the way people are interacting with them is just different. So, and I don't think that that's easily communicated upwards when people are just looking at the numbers on the spreadsheet or the deck.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple other pieces to that. Like there's been discussions around, does the pie just get bigger? Like, is there still a lot of searches on a search engine plus, a lot of the volume that moves to LLMs is net new additive because it's sort of a new outlet and new like behavior and things that you could ask that you just wouldn't have Googled, and like and things like that. So yeah, I think there's some dynamics there too that are yet to kind of be seen and play out.
Another interesting note too, which I'll find the source and we can, because I can't cite it off the top of my head, but there is really good data out there too around how LLMs are, despite like they're also sending referral traffic and linking out to websites or sending outbound traffic from their platforms like 2 to 3x more often than even like a Google or search. When you compare the data, it's different. It's much lower in terms of like the volume that people are searching for things on there. But the point is that it's a really productive source for traffic. But there's another misconception out there that's people are just staying on there and they're keeping you there. And no, they're citing things, they're linking out, and they are sending traffic. And that's the thing that people just don't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think the last thing there is we've talked before as well that like there's a decent amount of like a fear mongering, I guess, around the business application of it. And I think that it's not uncommon, especially on LinkedIn, for people to cite very consumer oriented stats and position it as, a business lens. And so, I think there's a lot there that will just continue to be a difference for sure in how many consumer queries move to some of these other tools and very like, personal things, travel things, whatever it might be,
Right.
Versus business query and some of that. So that's a lot to be determined. Any other, you had the one good one, any other questions that you've kind of heard people or said that they're getting asked?
I mean, it is top 3 all revolve around that, around organic ROI, LLM, just understanding LLM and LLM's behavior, and how do we get cited in those? That's the biggest one. Like, how do we get cited more and more? That's probably number 2 or 3 in that list. And like sub question, like, is it worth it? And it's such a interesting and complicated question. Actually, it's not, I guess, that complicated. Yeah, you should strive to get cited in those things if you're building a product that's site worthy and citable. But yeah, I'd say that that's probably one of the biggest ones is like, what are we seeing from a trend standpoint, which we've talked a bit about, and how do you get into those new sources? And then, we've talked on it. It's very similar to how you would approach content for or the other organic sources that we've talked about.
Which I think is a good segue. The Dwayne Forrester has a Substack and has been publishing quite a bit around all things, generative engine optimization, I guess. And he, in this post, we'll link it in the show notes. We're not going to go through it in great detail. It's quite technical. But he sort of makes the case for, I think it was 12 new
KPIs.
12 new KPIs in this new era. So kind of like it's positioned as like, the old SEO dashboard is out. This is the kind of the new. I think it's far too technical for a dashboard you would show to an executive team.
For sure.
I think any operator or someone who's doing a lot of the work to optimize should understand these at a more practical level. But I think that to your point, a lot of the discussion so far has been around like citation and like your presence in the search. So like, and that's a lot of what we've built already in our internal tools, like citation rates, where your position is, like how often you're showing up, in the search, share of voice against competitors, like all that stuff. And the interesting thing is that the way he lays it out is like there's this stack, like a and
search stack.
I think he does call it a search stack still. The interesting thing is that those are all like the last layer.
Right.
In his visual, it's the bottom layer, but it's like there are a lot of things before that in terms of like how you're actually preparing your content, like the crawlability, indexation, retrieval, reasoning. That's all like precursor that's tied to. So like the schema, crawlability, technical SEO, like all the stuff we've talked about that actually does fit there. We've seen other studies coming out. Again, we'll just make sure we have all the links in there that are definitely showing strong correlation to like some of the best ways to do that are basically your traditional, like what people have been doing in technical and on-site SEO for a long time, which is making sure it's clean, it's easy to index, there's not bloat, it's clear, there's good schema, like all of that stuff throughout there. And so I think that's really fascinating, and there is some really cool stuff that he's broken down in that issue of his Substack. But it's a big topic, and I think it's going to launch into a lot of new things for SEOs. And I mean, what do they keep getting called SEOs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd probably be a lot easier if we just like skipped to whatever we want to call all of this. Which I mean, again, it's GEO or just I don't know. Let's just leave it at organic marketing or organic marketers. That's like probably a bigger chunk of everybody's time is just like trying to figure that out or just decide on what that is when it's going to change. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know if I found that article really, really a good thing because it actually does give people a new way to new things to orient themselves around from an like LLM perspective. And you can kind of draw the parallels, which you're talking about, to like search metrics of old, which he calls out early on. He's like the old ways, this is the new way. I don't think he wants to call them like one-to-one, but I read that and you can see a bunch of those things in the layers that he has in that stack are akin to impressions. A lot of them aren't actually like metrics that equate to traffic or clicks or anything. They're actually just like, hey, here's an understanding of where you just appear. And there's no activity beyond that, which I think is also really interesting that no one's like talking about that. They're just like, let's get a heartbeat on where we're at and making sure that, I feel like we're going to have this little period of time where we're going to start throwing metrics at executives that are like, see, month over month, your frequency of appearance in LLMs is great and it's growing up, and they're going to see all these charts. And then at some point, they're just going to ask the question of like, all right, well, what's that doing for us from traffic perspective? And it's going to be even harder to tell because maybe they're not getting as much clicks, and that correlation of visibility isn't as high as the clicks, which is similar to impressions and clicks. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. He gives you all the tools in that article to build a dashboard, and it's super fascinating. I'm excited to see how it plays out. And I know we'll probably incorporate some of them to some extent.
Yeah, that's where I've been fairly deep into that in what we've been building internally, and just better understanding that. And I think the piece that's being focused on less, or maybe just talked about less, is how, like, he makes a good point that if the bots for LLMs don't even, get to your content or like ingest your content in any way, then like you're done from the start. Like,
yeah,
that's game over. It's like the equivalent of having your site set to no index,
right,
and then expecting to have results in a search engine. Like,
right,
if you don't get into that model at all, then everything else in that stack doesn't matter. Like, there's no citation, there's no traffic, there's no anything else. And so I do think that's a really big piece that isn't being talked about as much in an area where I've been focusing. But I think that there's some good stuff there. So like I said, we'll link the that post in the show notes. Definitely recommend that. And then there's a couple other, he gets some good internal links within that post to some other stuff he's written that I think is all really solid. And you want to talk about C.L.E.A.R?
Yeah.
C.L.E.A.R. So, we use a measurement framework called C.L.E.A.R, acronym. And it is something we started to build out, how was it, a year ago, probably?
Yeah.
It's been through a couple iterations, but the idea was we just felt like, through a lot of client engagements, there was far too much dependence on just like looking at organic search metrics. And, we're talking through repurposing, and we're talking through like other stuff. We're doing work on other parts of the website, which affect other metrics that aren't necessarily, impressions, click-through rate. And then just knowing, kind of where we were headed with expanding our services to do more non-paid channels and kind of support our recommendations for a lot of clients, that definitely wasn't going to cut it in terms of understanding that. So we built this. So
you can go through it.
Yeah. Conversion, loyalty, engagement, awareness, and reputation, with the idea that we could build, tracking and metrics and things around some of these core questions. So if you want to go through kind of what each of those, like the theoretical question that a business is asking of itself, for that each category.
Yeah. I mean, it's strategic, and I like that it starts with conversion, or C, because it's what we were talking about earlier, which is just generally what business impact is coming directly from our organic efforts, which is the number one question essentially we're getting from clients these days. Framed a little differently or phrased a little differently, but that should be number one, and that should be like the thing that informs, so much and everything else that we're going to run through in here. But that's the first broad question.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I mean, we tend to use the word organic to mean non-paid.
Right.
So even that, we probably should just reword for clarity, because we are trying to understand the business impact directly and indirectly from kind of all non-paid, not just organic. So we meant non-paid when we said organic in this case, but
right.
But even then,
so everyone's working on it.
Yeah. And like loyalty, are we building brand loyalty and retaining customers through our content, through our marketing efforts? Like, that is definitely a big one for companies. How and where are people interacting with our company and our brand? So that's engagement. That's definitely a big one. And like probably the most familiar and most carryover of like traditional quote unquote digital marketing metrics, I think would largely fit into that engagement bucket. Awareness, how is our overall visibility and brand awareness increasing? So again, that starts to become a big thing, like
brand mentions and citations.
Yeah, brand mentions, citations, generative engines, search impressions, social impressions, all that kind of stuff. And then lastly, reputation. Are we establishing ourselves as an authority in our space? We've said before, like every company you ever talk to, it's like we want to be the authority in our space.
Right.
Like,
and on specific topics, like non-brand,
yes.
quote unquote,
Yes.
topics.
Yes. And more and more, I think we've seen that shift. I think there used to be a heavy dependence on doing, Gartner and those types of things, or, having a CEO who loves to be on camera and a PR company can go get them on interviews and all that stuff. But like, we've seen a huge shift in, CEOs being able to do that with written text posts on LinkedIn. And, I think the first party data, like Gong, I think was super early in that, like just,
Oh yeah.
They weren't necessarily following that traditional playbook, but they just had access to a ton of data and became the authority in the space because of using that. And so I think we've seen that shift. And so therefore, again, it requires a new kind of way to think about it and measure all of that impact. And so that's kind of where that C.L.E.A.R framework has come for us, and be able to have a much better picture across multiple channels, different tactics, all that stuff that kind of paints in there.
Yeah, I think the reason I love this model or framework is there are, as you've already touched on a bunch, there are existing KPIs that matter that can easily be mapped to each of these, which we've talked about some, even like in the conversions, MQLs and all that type of stuff, or just conversions, pipeline, revenue, all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But is that whatever you align on for those KPIs internally, when you look at it all together, it is driving your strategy towards actually becoming more, influencing the possibility of you making sure you're getting into the LLMs, maintaining your visibility in search, whatever it is, all these different things. But these check like all really critical boxes on all the things that at a high level that the new world of organic is like, the quote unquote new world of organic is looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it'll be interesting to see, how this even evolves. And I think there will be some additional areas that probably start to come. If, for example, we mentioned like Dwayne Forrester, he sort of said, here's 12 new KPIs. Like, I think that a lot of those, like we said, these are not all KPIs you present to an executive team, but of those, some of them probably fit within this model, but over time, I don't think we're at a point in the LLM and just general AI landscape that like what he put there, that's the only 12, metrics. Like,
no,
it's going to continue to grow. And we get into like agentic stuff, you're going to start to probably have metrics tracking around, agentic usage versus like actual human usage and different things there. So
totally,
no doubt that this is not 100% future proof, but it is far better in what we can see than just trying to rely on traditional attribution tool or GA4 type of metrics and reporting.
Yeah. And one maybe final thing to emphasize on it is, I think if you look at it as like a checklist in terms of like, do we have coverage or are we tracking all the things in this? Two things that really stand out and tie back to the stuff we talked about on previous episodes: reputation, loyalty, those two in particular, because they are tied to strong products that mean like you're building good products, you're marketing, the product marketing is good and all those things, which we have said are big influencers in this new world. That like, I think for a long time, products that, they have funding or maybe just like have put it all in the marketing and the product's not there yet, right? Like I want to just get there and then the product can catch up. I don't know if that's going to be the case anymore. Like it has to be like a nice balanced organization that is leading with value and all these things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a nice sentiment. I know it's not necessarily always going to be the case, but I think that's good because I think in the past, like those two sections would like likely be unchecked for a lot of teams prior to this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Engagement, awareness, and conversion would be the other remaining three, to your point.
Yes.
Yes. I think that those have been tracked uh, for much longer than the others. And so, yeah. And or if anything, it was like, oh, sure, we have this PR firm and they give us some sort of like report. And that's kind of like the extent of what they would look at from there. So,
yep.
Yeah. So this is certainly a conversation will continue, as
Definitely.
it evolves. But the goal of this podcast is not to have, breaking news and, the latest and greatest, but obviously things that are very relevant that people are encountering right now and working through as companies, as marketers, all that. So with that, we'll shift. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's a piece in Search Engine Journal that was kind of outlined 10 hurdles that CMOs are facing today. And so we probably won't go into depth on all of them or really even comment, because I think some will be pretty obvious. But we'll link that article as well in the show notes, and then we can we'll kind of run through these. So
number one is very familiar to the conversation we've had so far.
Exactly. Perfect segue. Demonstrating return on marketing investment amidst economic uncertainty. So obviously we've been talking about, in particular, the rise of GEO and kind of how some of that's shifting. And that's a big part of the conversation we've been having. Obviously there are many CMOs who are also facing other aspects around all kinds of uncertainty, with pricing, raw materials, all kinds of different things that may impact their business. And so, I think demonstrating return on marketing investment. I think there was a little bit of an unnecessary drilling down and differentiation between ROI and ROMI in the article, but ultimately, I would agree. I mean, we don't probably need to go on much more with that one because we've already talked about it so much.
No, I mean, it's just we've talked a lot about all the things that you can at least start to put the pieces together to either demonstrate to your CMO what ROI looks like at a high level, because there's a lot we've talked here that can require some more digging or more specificity. But yeah, we know that that's a challenge, and I agree that that's the number one thing, because it's the number one question we're getting asked.
And I remember when I was consulting at the time when in the beginning of 2020, when the pandemic started, and one of the things that I was talking with multiple companies and was writing about was just look, your planning roadmap just has to shrink way down. You're not building 12-month plans. You're not saying we do this Q1, this Q2, and building all around that. You just gotta operate on a shorter cycle and be a little more flexible. And so I think that's probably the only other thing I would add there is just, if you're going to test stuff, test it smaller. You can't just get into analysis paralysis and be afraid to make a move, because you're going to feel penalized because you're now, being measured on a shorter scale potentially. But moving quicker, testing faster, trying things in a more lightweight, get early signals, double down where you're getting traction, all that stuff.
Yep.
The second one we probably don't need to go into unless you want to, adapting to Google's AI overviews and other SERP features.
No.
I think we've talked about that a good amount.
I mean, it's just similar to it's the broad conversation around LLMs in general. It's just anything that is an AI summary, how do you get into it?
Yep.
We touched on it earlier, and other SERP features are still there, but I think it's going to evolve too. I'd say that for 2025, that's a big one, but I bet you it'll drop down the list in 2026.
Agree. Number 3 was meeting evolving customer expectations across their omni-channel journeys. It's a bit of a mouthful. I think I don't, this is not new. I guess is my takeaway. We already talked about whatever you want to call it, dark social, like referrals and people talking in Slack, and a lot have already been navigating that, and like where and how to stand out in customer reviews like G2, Trust Radius, like there's a lot.
Yeah.
It's been getting more and more fragmented over the years, and so to me that's not a new one, but it's definitely still relevant.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are going to tie to AI and LLMs, but I think the one thing that stands out there, because to your point, like it should have been something we've always been doing, but it's like within those channels or even the dark ones, like just understanding that audience and like what is the thing that's going to like really stand out in that audience and that tool or wherever a conversation's happening. And that's like where you talk about different content types and stuff, right? Like it's just not like, hey, let's create blog content and distribute it and all that. Like, no, like how do you end up like further down in the generative conversation, right? Because like someone's trying to accomplish something. But anyway, there's a lot to go into in that potentially. But yeah, I agree. It's something we should have been doing.
Yeah. Number 4, balancing artificial intelligence with human creativity, which I thought was a really interesting point, because it is something that I think, particularly in writing and design, I think are the two primary things. And talking with prospects, talking with clients, we're seeing a lot of different permutations of how people are using them. So they're different points in the process. Some are using it entirely, some are using it not at all. To me, that is a really interesting one, because as a CMO, that means you're trying to figure out what's the right mix of speed, cost, and like quality of output. And so there are certainly some people who are, I want speed, and I don't care as much about quality of output, and therefore I'm gonna make decisions accordingly or whatever. But it is definitely a big new variable in how they're probably getting told you have less headcount available to you this year, or your budget is smaller, or both. And therefore that sort of puts a lot more pressure on how do I figure out the best way to utilize both and kind of get the best end result.
Yeah, and just the abundance of tools that are out there for the teams or the resources you have to use. Like, it'll be interesting to see what happens in a few years, because I think like internal like machines will have been built. And machines, I mean like in quotes, like a system has been built with those tools in mind to balance creativity and scale and all that, where it'll just be we're not figuring this out anymore. It's just there and we're optimizing for it. But yeah, I think that's actually one of the other questions we get a lot from clients. It's just like, where should we use AI and where should we not? And
aligning marketing strategies with overall business objectives. That shouldn't be a hurdle, and to me is table stakes, but
I agree. I think it also just, I agree. It's what we've already talked about too. Like,
I guess I'll take that back. I think I know for a fact there are a lot of CMOs that don't actually have a good understanding of how to tie marketing strategies to business objectives, because they've had very like fluffy accountability for a lot of their career, and just like pieces that didn't matter, and maybe weren't as like performance marketing, acquisition marketing focused, and therefore struggle with that. So I will I guess acknowledge that probably is a hurdle for some. It shouldn't be, and to me again, it should be priority number one. Like, don't do anything that's not tying to business objectives. But I think that's reality.
I think the one thing I'd put on it is like something I was alluding to earlier around like correlation, is just like, I feel like it's how we approach that. It shouldn't be this like, I have to figure out how to attribute every single dollar to every single action type of thing, which it was. It's going to have to be now, how do I actually show and tell a story around the work we're doing, obviously the investment put in and the outcomes of that in a way that like makes logical sense versus like totally, I can see it right here, 1-to-1, right? Like I think, and then just making sure that you're not over your skis on investment.
Yeah. Number 6, effective content creation, scaling, and differentiation.
I mean, that's kind of similar to the number 4 to some extent.
The AI and human creativity.
Yep.
Yeah, I think like differentiation is probably the biggest part of that one, and ever more critical. Like it's all very, very good. Like there was just so much. Like I remember saying at one point, probably said it multiple times, like we've reached this point where like every marketer or content marketer, it just has like a SEMrush license and a ClearScope license,
right,
and they're just like pumping out content for SEO and at kind of nauseating levels at times. And so I think this is all a very, very healthy direction, and even again tying into the GEO stuff really pulls it back and makes it critical to get it in the right place, differentiate, have meaning, create stuff for a reason, not just for a keyword, and all that. So I would agree. And then I think, like you said, the rest of it is that same kind of AI human creativity balance.
Yeah. I'm just glad content creation's on there, because it feels like within that larger conversation we're having, it seems like sometimes they're questioning, should we even create content? And you're like,
yeah, oh my gosh, yeah.
Isn't that what marketing is?
Right. Yes, at the end of the day, yeah.
Yeah.
Building and maintaining brand trust and authenticity.
I think that's actually a pretty big challenge to some extent.
Yeah. Because
all the things that, again, we've alluded to, I think one, product marketing is core to that. I think customer success teams are core to that. Like I guess it's difficult because it's a cross-functional thing more than just a marketing initiative. And you have to make sure all those things are aligned and working together.
Yep.
And because we're past the days of like marketing being able to mask, bad product. So like, how do you build trust if the product doesn't work, right? Marketing can't just do that. So the product has to be good. So it's just like, it's a cross-functional effort. So I agree it's a hurdle for a CMO, but I think like many things that a C-suite member would own, they don't fully own it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's all the authenticity. A lot of that's probably, again, very tied to the differentiation and whatnot. Number 8, navigating data privacy and governance in a post-cookie world. I would argue that is not a hurdle. That is a weight around the CMO's ankle as they have to try to go over every other hurdle.
Elaborate.
It's in my opinion an annoying. The Klarna CEO recently talked about GDPR.
Oh yeah.
And I think put it really well, which is like the intentions were good. The whatever like legislation policy around it was very poorly written, and it's just evolved into such a tax on everything, like on the user, the end user, the company, everything. It's just like it's such a challenge that just finds its way into a lot of the different marketing challenges and tactics and everything you're trying to do. So
I think that's good point.
But yes, very, very, I mean, it's fine. I'll call it a hurdle. It is very much a hurdle, a challenge. Attracting, retaining, and upskilling marketing talent. I think that's potentially, top 3.
Agreed.
It's a very fast moving time right now.
Yeah.
And you like say you have a marketing team of 10 people, you probably actually have already a pretty big distribution of like their self-learning, like how much self-learning they've done around AI tools, understanding LLMs, like a lot of things. Like some people are going to self-learn and evolve with the times, and the others are just going to want to kind of keep doing the way they've done it. And so you're going to have this spectrum of people already, there, and then you have like some younger folks coming right out of college or whatever that are going to be just so much more AI native already, and that's only going to continue to be the case.
Yeah.
So you have like
they don't have all the baggage.
Correct.
They only know what they know is the reality now. So I heard this is a quote, I'm stealing it from someone, but that's like actually a refreshing thought that like they will just operate with the tools and the knowledge that they have and not like going like, man, I miss rankings. Like I miss, I miss the days of like all these different things, which is a good thing. So yeah, I think that's actually, hopefully there's some eager marketers out there, but that's still like, you gotta sift through it.
Which is, kind of my second time around the track on all that, because it was the same thing with the internet in general. Like, and so it was effectively an internet native, type of generation, coming out of college, and like we'd had it for a long time, and emails familiar, and whatever, all that stuff. So, but yeah, I think even just knowing like, it says attracting, retaining, and upskilling. And I think that those are all valid hurdles in their own way. Like, identifying what skill sets matter to you and what are going to matter in the next 12 months, 24 months, like, and attracting people with those or getting your team up to speed. Like, you're kind of running as the ground's being paved in front of you, like, there's not a lot of vision out ahead, because everything's changing so quickly.
I think also, and this is kind of a downer of a note, but I've read a bunch of Reddit threads that have been people talking about this, but the fear mongering we've alluded to as well around like the rapid evolution of the space, especially with LLMs, I think it's making really good marketers want to not be marketers. So I think within that, it's a challenge to find, because I think your pool is shrinking because of that to some extent. I don't know how to quantify that, of course. It's all qualitative and anecdotal, but there's things that are being said to like make people feel like SEO is obsolete, and that doesn't make people who've been working hard to like build this thing that is still relevant to the thing that is actually happening feel good, because all these other competing agendas. That's my hot take for the first time, I think, on this particular format.
I mean, I think there's always people, there's plenty of people, marketers we've worked with that have pivoted into other areas. And I think that's a normal thing, but I would agree that there's probably a bit of a watershed moment, and, folks just saying, I'm just going to go to nursing school, or like, I just want to do something completely different.
Go be bartender.
Or like, I study to be a teacher. I want to go back.
Those are better things. Those are better things.
Nurse, teacher, bartender.
Yep.
So anyway, I think that's a good point, and it probably will be a decent sized shift. For the industry. And then lastly, number 10 was fostering cross-functional collaboration, which I think hits on your point earlier that I don't remember.
It was the trust and authority. Brand trust and
authenticity. That you have to work across the organization that much more. I mean, even just thinking about like, if you have a company of 500 people and you have people starting to use AI tools in different ways, signing up for free things, like even just trying to like manage brand guidelines alone. Across, an organization, is that much harder. When people are, leveraging all these tools, let alone everything else that comes kind of under a CMO's purview. So I do think that like that's sort of like maybe not as much of a collaboration thing, but it is still very much a cross-functional aspect. And then on top of that, yeah, the collaboration, how are we working together? What does this mean for the brand? What's this mean for our product or service? Like,
yeah,
there's a lot to it.
I think all the best, successful products probably have like really strong cross-functional collaboration. I think where we see it now, especially being more important, is in those. We work with a lot of technical clients, clients that have technical products, and marketers aren't all AI experts. So you got to work with your engineering team to understand concepts and make sure you're writing about the right things. And that's not to say that like the answer to that too is like get the engineers to write that. Like there's a balance here, right? Teams contribute in different ways, and I think that that's a really good example of where that collaboration is super important. And then we're really big proponents of making sure you're enabling, CS and sales and all that. So like all these teams should be talking, closing loops, and making sure that they're using marketing collateral effectively. So I think it is important. I actually feel like it shouldn't be 10.
Yeah, good point.
I don't know where, but it's further up the list.
Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Make sure to like and subscribe. Catch any of the future sessions that we release. Visit tedspeed.io to check out our company, a lot of our content. You can also visit newsletter.tedspeed.io. Subscribe to our free Substack, where we publish once a month, but then also drop these episodes there first, so you can get those before they hit any other channels. And with that, we'll wrap up and continue on from here.
Sweet.
All right. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.